Color Interrupted, translating Chapter 2 of Blushborn by Jeff B. White. Content warning, childhood trauma, SA, and trafficking, and medical abuse. The vocabulary of survival. Before I get into Chapter 2, I want to make some things clear about this story. While I'm doing these little breakdowns, I will use the word trauma when appropriate. However, it should be noted that that word does not appear in the book one time. It is not a word that they have language for, because if there were language for it, then there would have been ways to deal with it. Also, it should be noted that in a book that is about color, I created a very unique challenge for myself. You can't just say something turns blue and then say that this other thing is blue and then that thing is blue and then everything in the book is blue. It just becomes extremely redundant, and things have to glow in shades of cerulean and hues of azure with the vibrance of cobalt. Another challenge is that in describing things with the word color, we have specific socio-political linguistics that are very heavily charged in our world. These are the things that I worked hard to avoid. For example, the phrase of color and the word colored both hold very specific meanings in our world. One is considered to be absolutely negative, and the other one is simply a socio-linguistic term. Regardless, I wanted to avoid any real-world associations in my book. You will see something being described as now having color and people being described as possessing color. Also, instead of them all becoming people of color or world of color, I use the only phrase that apparently we have not used here yet, which is with color. So when you notice this and you see it as being poor grammar, you can know that it is actually a moment of world building that separates this story from our own world. Color Interrupted. Today, we're discussing Chapter 2 of Blushborn, which is titled Color Interrupted. And yes, I named the chapter after Girl Interrupted, because that book and that movie were absolutely transformative to me. It was one of the very first times that I ever felt seen in media. Even though it's a story about a girl in the 60s, there was something so powerful and resonant about that story and about what Susanna went through that truly spoke to me. There are days as recently as last week when quotes from that book seep out into my everyday vernacular. And if you haven't read that book or seen the movie, I highly suggest it. At the end of the previous chapter, Jethrin was forced to take a pill by the big automatic and Martier. This violation triggered the first eruption of color, a deep indigo. This was the violent eruption of screaming color that burst out of him. It was the screams of his spirit, unable to contain itself any longer. This mirrors how, in my life, I became a violent mess. I had been so violated in so many ways that I would just scream. I would fight and I would protest. I would try to attack any system that made me feel like I was not worthy. I would try to speak out against some of the things that were happening to me, and in doing so, people would often dismiss my trauma by saying that I was just so desperate for attention that I was making it up. They used my survival instincts as proof that I deserved the abuse. It created a cycle that never seemed to end and never seemed to scale down. As Chapter 2 begins, he is living in the aftermath of that violation and release, carrying an energy that has stained his apartment. As he's brushing his teeth the next morning, he realizes that his tongue and gums are now a shade of light purple, where they used to be the color of wet cement. He begins questioning himself as to how he even knows the words for these colors. His mother awakens to find their apartment has changed, and instead of being scared or freaking out, she simply looks at her son and says that they need to have a conversation. And while he's unsure what she wants to talk about, he assumes she wants to send him away, so he avoids the conversation and makes his way to work. It's in the moment when he steps outside of his apartment that he realizes the colors have stained more than just his home. He sees that the trees are now lilac, and notices a local fruit vendor having purple fruit. He also sees the mountains in the distance now having one of their peaks possessing the same shade of color that's now on his skin. He goes about his day at work and then comes home, and this is where the story shifts from medical abuse to an allegory for the trafficking portion of my life. This is one of the most difficult points of my life I've ever lived, and it would be years down the line before I would finally realize exactly how horrific what had happened to me was, and it would be years later before I'm able to even address it. This was extremely difficult to write about and to talk about. Strangely, the most difficult thing about all of it was to translate it into the story, to bring it into something that Jethrin had to live through. And I think that's because I created a character who feels so alive and precious, at least to me, that forcing him to go through the effect of trauma that I survived feels wrong. And that might not be clear on the page in the beginning because it might look like I'm more enjoying just punishing him for the sake of doing so. But as you continue to read, I think you'll see that he receives such a grand rise and resolution that it more than makes up for what he had to endure when he was younger. If anything, that is the part of the story that is the true fantasy. The Broker of Bones. In my memoir, Shards of Hope, I describe a trusted adult who began abusing me when I was 10 years old. This individual eventually began renting me out to his friends. They would give me drugs and pass me around. I was nothing more than just a product to them. There is a multi-billion-dollar global industry in modern society that relies on the commodification of trauma and the breakdown of social safety nets. The system operates by identifying vulnerable individuals and turning their bodies into a product for sale. This market requires constant replenishment of victims, often using debt bondage or physical coercion to ensure that the profit stays with the exploiter while the person being sold carries all the risk and damage. Today, we're seeing the effects of these sorts of things with the releasing of the Epstein files and seeing the wide-scale breach of trust from leaders around the world. This is what I was directly attempting to convey with the moment when Martyr threatens Regale by saying that her son will be sent to re-education and that this must be done so that he can do his part to pay back the financial burden that he's created. As I've previously explained, Martyr is an amalgamation of all the men who terrorized me in my childhood. He also serves a different plot point in the story, in that he was placed in their home as the basic embodiment of a welfare check. He represents the state influence in the home and the control that government overreach often creates. This is also the scene where we get a second mention of the Silvari, who Martyr refers to as fairies, which is a derogatory term. Silvari is a word derived from salvare, from Latin salvo, to be saved, and silveira in Portuguese for woodland. In the Urdu language, silvari literally translates to silvery. And even here, silvaris are silver-skinned magical winged creatures who live in the forest. Fairy is the word used by non-magical people as a slur. The Architects of the Grey. In the world of Evenhere, by having Martyr be the person who takes the boy to the tavern to put him on display, it creates a sense of state-sanctioned abuse. While it is not initially made clear whether or not the leaders of the kingdom are aware of this happening or not, the fact that he is assigned by the state and is requiring this to happen under the threat of report makes it irrelevant whether the kingdom ordered it to happen or not. Because when the state is in your home making demands, you listen. The law that was put in place to create the position of the mandated Heerman was created by an individual in the story named the Author of Autonomy. As we continue to explore the story, he will be explained more fully, but his purpose is to create laws in regards to the women of the kingdom. He is a blatant misogynist who is utterly clueless about women. He and other lawmakers in the story are a direct commentary on the lack of representation in government and the disconnect between the needs of the people and the actions of leaders. In fact, in the previous chapter, we hear mention of a group called the Triad. They are the three highest members of the Big Odd Council. The others have already been mentioned in the radio broadcast. The Yoke of Youth is the oldest person in the kingdom, and she is charged with creating the laws regarding children, known as Heerlings or Lings. She created the child labor law that requires children over the age of 10 to begin employment. Another member is the Arbiter of Aging. This person is a Gen Z coded influencer type who is not your average fantasy character, as he has a very modern vernacular. He was mentioned in a radio broadcast in which he enacted the Aesthetic Improvement Ordinance, which requires all people over the age of 60 to be indoors between the hours of 5 a.m. and 4 a.m. so that the people that are younger do not have to smell the odor of elderly people. It is absurd. And that is the point, because that's what makes it scary. The fact that these people are in control and are able to create laws that become enforced while being so utterly disconnected from reality and from the people that they represent is and should be terrifying. But that's just how things are. And in the story, that is how they remain until someone steps up and does something about it. The same rings true in real life. The Marketplace of Shame. The scene at the Grey Mug Tavern is an allegory for the hidden world of trafficking. In my life, I felt like a specimen under glass or an animal in a cage while someone else rattled the bars for a fee. In the tavern, Jethrin is forced to scrub the protective dust from his face so men can gawk at the pink of his blush. Once he shows them his colors, they see the new indigo and know that he was responsible for the new vibrancy in the world. He is later inspected by a man named Garrus, who circles him like a farmer assessing livestock. There's something harrowing about being hunted while sitting perfectly still. Martier collects the tokens in the tavern, mirroring the money that was made off my body when I was a child. This is the market of shame, where you are not a person, but an object assessed for your value. While this is absolutely direct allegory from my own experiences, you do not have to be a survivor of trafficking for this to apply to you. There are so many aspects of our lives today that are commodified. The entire pharmaceutical industrial complex is put in place to maintain our illnesses instead of to treat them and heal our bodies. Because corporations can make far more money off of us if we are sick than if we are cured. It's why 4 out of 5 dentists recommend Trident. It's not because gum is good for your teeth. The Song of Silence, Cobalt. In this chapter, at the beginning, he has a vision of sorts that shows him a forest with a soldier who is carried away by this blue mist that allows him to forget all of the pains of war. While he's in the tavern and he's being gawked at by all these men, he remembers this vision and uses those memories to kind of escape for a moment. It's at the point whenever he repeats a phrase that he heard in that vision that things change. Forget so that you can remember. This is disassociation. It is the color of the walls that we build when we have to go away in our minds to survive what is happening to our bodies. But is also shown later in the book to be a metaphor for the way that people use drugs and alcohol as coping mechanisms to avoid facing what they've been through. This is the Song of Silence. The releasing of this color is not something he's going to be able to hide. It's happened in plain view of everyone. It was clear, and it was obvious that it came from him. People in the tavern were already stained from the shades of purple, some on their skin, some on their hair, or their eyes. This new color only furthers that issue. A woman sees her reflection and sees her skin is now the shade of cyan. And in a moment that shocks them all, the flames in the lanterns at the tavern all now burn with the shade of cerulean. Drawing the fire. By the end of this chapter, Jethrin realizes he has to leave home to protect his mother. He knows that if she finds out what is happening, she will try to protect him, and she will be executed for protecting him. So Jethrin flees into the night, because he must become the sole focus of the hunt, to keep the fire away from the one person he loves. It mirrors the way that I had to leave Mississippi, and I had to leave so much of my life behind just to stay alive. I had to leave people who I cared about, and who I loved deeply. Some of them were very angry that I left them behind. But if I hadn't, I would not have survived. And survival often looks like betrayal. Find your colors. I wrote this chapter for the boy who was inspected in the shadows and finally rose to find the light. The vibrancy in my blood was a fire that they could not put out. It might have changed shades, but it is still my light. What's up next? Tomorrow, I will post the full text of Chapter 2 for you to listen to and read. I will also be posting a deeper look into the Grey and why the people of Evenhere continue to accept the world that they live in. A birthday gift. While I'm working to build this community, I'm offering a 44% off for new subscribers from now until February 18th. So monthly subscriptions are now $3.08, and a yearly subscription is $30.80. So if Jethrin's journey through the Grey resonates with your own survival, consider becoming a free or paid subscriber. And Find Your Colors is now a podcast available on Spotify. Just look for the Find Your Colors podcast there and listen to all of these episodes for free.